Given my analysis of how the war is progressing, I think that Iran has many more advantages over the United States. The reality is that right now, it's a war of attrition between the United States and Iran. And the Iranians have been preparing 20 years for this AI bubble in the United States. Then this AI bubble will burst, and with it will burst as well the entire American economy, which is really a financial Ponzi scheme.
Right.
So that's a dire situation that the Americans are facing right now.
大家好，今天我想给大家先讲一个2024年就做出的让所有人觉得疯了的预测。有人预测了3件事情：第一，特朗普会赢；第二，美国会对伊朗开战；第三，美国会输掉这场战争。前2个已经应验，第3个正在应验。而这个人给出的理由比美国打不过伊朗更震撼。他说，伊朗不是在跟美国打仗，伊朗是在摧毁美元石油体系赖以生存的整个海湾国家经济。你打伊朗，伊朗不打你，他打谁？打沙特，打阿联酋，打卡塔尔，打那些把石油美元循环回美国经济的海湾国家。他用50万美元一架的无人机摧毁一座海水淡化厂，整个海湾国家60%的淡水供应就没了，2周之内断水。同时他打亚马逊的数据中心，美国人工智能泡沫最大的海外投资来自海湾国家，如果海湾国家不再有钱投资美国 AI， 整个泡沫就破了。这一仗表面上是美伊军事对抗，实际上是伊朗在拆美国的金融地基。而今天这期呢，我就带大家彻底拆开这场战争的底层逻辑。为什么美国打不起这场仗？为什么伊朗准备了20年？以及美国霸权到底会不会因此崩塌？话不多说，我们先看一个专家对此的一个解读，我们再做一个延伸。
So, for people who aren't familiar with your work, I wanted to show folks that back in 2024, you made 3 big predictions. 1, that Trump would win. 2, that he would start a war with Iran. And 3, that the U.S. would lose that war. Let's take a listen to that.
In this class this semester, I'm making 3 big predictions, right? First is that Trump will win in November. Second is that the United States will go to war against Iran. And the third big prediction is that the United States will lose this war, which will forever change the global order.
So obviously that last one is the only one that has not yet come to fruition is quite a stunning prediction. Do you stand by it? And what have you seen so far that leads you to sort of stand firm in that conclusion?
Given my analysis of how the war is progressing, I think that Iran has many more advantages over the United States. The reality is that right now, it's a war of attrition between the United States and Iran. And the Iranians have been preparing 20 years for this conflict. In their eschatology, in their religion, this is a war against the great Satan. They've had many practice runs. Last June was a 12-day war when the Iranians were able to examine and analyze the strike capacities of both the Israelis and the Americans. And they've had a lot of time, 8 months, to prepare fully for this new attack. They, through the proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Shia militias, have been able to really grasp the American mentality, and now they have a pretty good strategy of how to weaken and ultimately destroy the American empire. So what the Iranians are doing is they're waging war against the entire global economy, and so they are striking the GCC countries. And not only are they striking GCC countries, American bases, but they're going after the critical energy infrastructure of these bases. They blocked out the Strait of Hormuz. And eventually, they will go after the water desalination plants, which is the lifeblood of these nations because they don't have fresh water supply. In fact, the water desalination plants provide 60% of the GCC's water supply. So if a drone, and these drones cost $50,000, if they wiped out a desalination of 10 million people, right? They'd be out of water in 2 weeks. in 2 weeks. And right now, the Iranians have de facto closed off the Strait of Hormuz, and the GCC gets 90% of its food from the Strait of Hormuz. So I know a lot of people are talking about the disruptions to the global economy, but right now, the Iranians are actually threatening the very existence of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Qatar. And why this is important is that the Gulf states are really the linchpin of the American economy. So what they do is they sell petrodollars and then they recycle the petrodollars back into the American economy through the investments in the stock market. And right now, we know that the entire American economy is propped up by AI investments in data centers. And a lot of that comes from the Gulf states. So if the Gulf states are no longer able to sell oil and they're no longer able to finance this AI bubble in the United States, then this AI bubble will burst, and with it will burst as well as the entire American economy, which is really a financial Ponzi scheme.
Right.
So that's a dire situation that the Americans are facing right now.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, sir, an Amazon data center was literally hit in the UAE. And now, of course, big tech companies, which were looking at the UAE as a major potential data center investment hub with cheap and abundant energy, probably going to be rethinking that. We also wanted to talk to you about munitions. We can put this next one up here on the screen. The United States is racing to accomplish Iran mission before munitions run out. This is specifically around interceptor math. There's a famous video just from yesterday in Israel, which shows a single Iranian ballistic missile, which is being targeted by some 11 different interceptors, all of which miss. Most of those come from the United States, not to mention all of the different bases, the GCC countries that you just talked about, and the asymmetry of the cost. It's $1 million for a missile, tens of millions per interceptor in some of these cases. With these munitions running out, how does that change the global picture? So you're in China, obviously, much of the stocks in Asia of the United States are likely to have to be cannibalized if this were to go on. How is that going to affect the global picture here?
Right. So my first point is that the United States military is not designed to fight a 21st century war. Remember, the military-industrial complex came into being after World War II, and it was designed to fight the Cold War. And the Cold War was really about muscle flexing, about who was able to send people up into space, who was to first get the person on the moon, who had the more complex missile systems. And so the entire American military strategy revolves around very sophisticated technology that costs a lot of money to build, and that's what the American air defense system is basically, and that's why we're seeing this asymmetry, as you point out, in this war, where you have these $1 million missiles trying to take out these $50,000 drones, and it's not sustainable in the long term. And so what we're seeing is really the puncturing of the aura of invincibility and invisibility that sustained American hegemony for the past 20 years, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And this is really a reordering of not just the global economy, because this signals the collapse of the petrodollar, and with it, the entire US dollar-based reserve currency system, but also the global hegemony of the United States. We're moving towards a multipolar world.
Professor, this morning, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth was asked a question about potential ground troops in Iran. He refused to rule out that possibility. And he said, oh, well, we're not going to project to you what we will or will not do, but we don't want to, rule anything out. We will do what it takes. Do you think that America will end up invading Iran from the ground, since it's already becoming relatively clear they won't be able to accomplish the goal of regime change or even regime collapse using just air power alone?
Right. So everyone says that the worst calamity that could happen in the United States is if it were to send ground troops into Iran. At the same time, the United States are committed to regime change in Iran. We've never had a precedent in history where you were able to regime change from the air alone. You need ground troops. And so unfortunately, what's going to happen over the next few months is that pressure will build on America to send ground troops, especially from the GCC countries and from Israel, which are being pounded right now by the Iranians. So remember that if the GCC countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, if they go, then the petrodollar goes with them. So the Americans need to protect these countries, and these countries are going to demand that either the Americans bribe the Iranians to seize, and this is like $5 trillion in indemnity, okay? Or send ground troops to wipe out the Iranian threat once and for all. And I know that there's no political will for ground troops to be used against Iran among the American people. But remember that 78% of American people was against initial strikes against Iran in the first place.
Right. And one of the things that really comes into question, I think, with all of this, sir, when we're looking at the geopolitical picture and the sacrificing in much of this from the United States on behalf of Israel, is kind of a question as to who and what wanted this. We were actually curious for your view on a disputed report here from the Washington Post. We can put it up here on the screen, F3. A push from the Saudis. Israel helped move Trump to attack Iran. Now, this has been internally disputed by Saudi Arabia, saying that they did not push the Trump administration to attack Iran. However, this is clearly an authorized leak from our own government trying to at least lay some of the blame on behalf of the GCC. What do you make of this analysis and of this narrative that Saudi Arabia was also trying to be behind this push to bomb Iran?
So I've always argued that both Saudi Arabia and Israel are heavily invested in regime change in Iran. Yeah. In fact, Saudi Arabia sees Iran as much more of an existential crisis than Israel. Because remember, Israel still has nuclear weapons, and Israel is a very diverse, very sophisticated economy, whereas Saudi Arabia is completely reliant on oil. And it's always had problems with Iran because Iran is a theocracy opposed to the Saudi monarchy. Iran funds and equips the Houthis, which have been antagonistic towards Saudi Arabia for the longest time. And right now, the Saudi economy is suffering. It's been trying to pivot towards more of a tourist economy. That's why they brought in Ronaldo. That's why they're switching to e-gaming. That's why they're building something called a line, NEOM. And all these things are not working out. So they need to be able to control the oil resources of the entire Middle East if they are to survive and thrive as a nation. So I do believe that this reporting is credible, even though it does make Saudi Arabia look bad. But remember, Saudi Arabia says that they wanted peace, but they are helping the Israelis and Americans attack Iran right now because they're allowing the Israelis and Americans to use Saudi airspace.
So help us understand, because it still feels to me like there's some pieces that don't totally add up. You had, in advance of this war on Iran, you had top military brass up to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying, this is a really bad idea. We are not ready for this. All the math on the interceptors that's been talked about for months at this point. And yet Trump still decided to go ahead. What is the calculus that he was making here that led him to take what, already appears to be catastrophic actions?
Right. Okay. So this is the key question. Why do they do this? And I think there are three possibilities. Okay. And I think all three possibilities are valid. The first is that of hubris. If you look at history, this is how empires behave. So the Mindoro kidnapping was quick, successful, and it was adrenaline rush for Trump. And that made him overconfident in the capacity of the American military. Okay, so hubris is a factor, and we see this throughout history. Why did Hitler invade Stalin? Because he conquered Europe really easily, and he thought it was invincible, right? And that led to the destruction of the German army in the Soviet Union. So hubris is a factor. Then you have to look at internal political calculus, where even though America does not benefit from this war against Iran, Trump himself personally benefits. Why? Because the Saudis and the Israelis are bribing him to attack Iran. Remember that the Saudis invested $2 billion in the private equity fund of Jared Kushner, who is the son-in-law of Donald Trump. And the Israelis, through Miriam Adelson, have been financing Trump's political career, right? So Miriam Adelson, a few months back, said that she will put up $250 million if Trump were to run a third term. So Trump is getting a lot of financial and political support from the Saudis and Israelis. Also remember that if this war goes sideways and Trump is forced to use ground troops, he will probably get approval from Congress, and this will give him emergency war powers, which will allow him to influence the midterms. So Trump is thinking about a third term. And I think at the ballot box, he probably won't get it. But if there's a war going on and you can delay elections and you have emergency war powers and people rally around the flag, then he probably will get a third term. And the last factor that is very important is the eschatological factor, where if you look at the Epstein files, it's clear that we are run by secret societies. It's clear that the world is run by these individuals who have a lot of power. We don't know who they are, but they control the military. They control the national security apparatus. And these people, there are different names for these people. You can call them the Illuminati. And the Illuminati are composed of three major groups, okay? You have the Jesuits, who control the Vatican. You have the Sephardim Frankists, which control the modern state of Israel today. And you have the Freemasons, which control the national security apparatus of the United States. And they believe that Israel, this war in the Middle East, is key to the end times in creating heaven on earth. So it's almost like a script that they're following, even though it doesn't make any geopolitical sense, okay? So I would say that these three are the best reasons why this is happening.
要理解这场战争，大家得先理解伊朗的底层逻辑。伊朗人把美国称为大撒旦，这不是随口说的，在他们什叶派的宗教叙事里，美国代表着邪恶，这不是政治口号，这是世界观。所以伊朗为这场可能的冲突准备了20年。这20年他们干了什么呢？第一，建立了一个覆盖中东的代理人网络，哈马斯真主党、胡塞武装、伊拉克民兵，这不是散兵游勇，是经过长期训练、有组织、有装备的非对称作战力量。第二，研发了大量的低成本、高精度武器，巡航导弹、自杀式无人机，成本低到你无法想象。第三，研究了美国的心态，伊朗人花了20年观察美国人怎么打仗、怎么反应、怎么崩溃，他们知道美国人最怕什么，尤其是伤亡。美国一打仗死几百个人，国内舆论就会炸了。伊朗人清楚这一点，所以他们从不追求击败美军，他们追求的是让美军受不了。2025年6月，双方已经有过一次12天的有限冲突。那场仗对伊朗来说是一次摸底考试，他们测试了美军的反应速度、拦截能力、空中优势，回去调整战术，为真正的战争做最后准备。好了，那美国的问题出在哪呢？第一是美军的武器库是冷战遗产。美国军事工业复合体最辉煌的时期是冷战，那时候的设计理念是我要比苏联更强、更贵、更先进，所以美国的导弹、战机、军舰全是精工细作的高端产品，一枚标准防空导弹几百万到上千万美元，一架 F-35 1亿多美元。这个体系在冷战时期是有效的，但问题是冷战已经结束30多年了。伊朗的武器是什么？一架沙哈德无人机，成本不到5万美元，一枚弹道导弹20到50万美元。美国要拦截伊朗的导弹，一次发射10几枚拦截弹，每枚几百万美元，成本是伊朗的几十倍。有一个视频最近在疯传，一枚伊朗的导弹飞向以色列，美国发了11枚拦截弹，全部打偏了。11枚拦截弹的成本超过5000万美元，而伊朗那枚导弹呢，不到50万美元，100倍的差距，你拦10次国库就空了。第二，美国的防空系统不够用。美国在中东有多少防空系统？爱国者、萨德、宙斯盾听起来很多，但伊朗的导弹和无人机有多少？数以千计。而且伊朗人学聪明了，他们不打大目标，他们打关键目标。海水淡化厂、发电站、港口、数据中心，全是一打就瘫的民用基础设施。海湾国家60%的淡水来自海水淡化。如果一座淡化厂被无人机摧毁，2周之内那个城市就没水喝了。2周没有水你能撑多久？说到这个份上，我们要进入整期节目最核心的部分。伊朗要摧毁的不是美国在中东的军事基地，他们要摧毁的是石油美元体系赖以生存的海湾国家经济。我给大家画一个逻辑链条，大家仔细看。第一，海湾国家卖石油收美元；第二，这些石油美元回到美国，买美国国债，投资美国股市，投资美国 AI 数据中心；第三，美国用这些钱维持全球军事霸权，维持金融霸权。这是一个完整的美元环流体系。没有海湾国家的石油美元，美国经济撑不住。那伊朗在做什么？他在攻击海湾国家，不是军事占领，是经济瘫痪。大家看，最近伊朗袭击了亚马逊在阿联酋的数据中心。为什么打数据中心？因为美国 AI 泡沫最大的海外资金来源就是海湾国家的投资。如果海湾国家不再有钱投资美国 AI， 整个泡沫就会破。打海水淡化厂，打港口，打石油设施，打数据中心， 每一下都打在石油美元的命门上。沙特的 GDP、阿联酋的金融中心、卡塔尔的天然气收入，全被导弹和无人机威胁着。这些国家还能像以前那样源源不断的把美元输送回美国吗？那就不能了。没有石油美元的回流，美国的资本市场怎么办？美国还能维持全球军事的部署吗？所以大家看明白了吗？伊朗不是在跟美军打仗，伊朗是在拆美国霸权的金融地基啊。那最后一个问题，如果美国真的输了，世界会变成什么样？给大家讲3条。第一，美元的全球储备货币地位会加速崩塌。海湾国家是美国石油美元体系的核心伙伴，如果这些国家被伊朗打瘫了，或者被迫不再用美元结算石油，美元就失去了最大的锚定物。没有石油美元的支撑，美元还能维持现在的全球储备货币的地位吗？我看是很难的。第二，美国的盟友体系会加速瓦解。沙特、阿联酋、卡塔尔这些国家为什么跟美国合作？因为美国提供安全保护伞。如果伊朗能随时打瘫他们的海水淡化厂、石油设施、数据中心，而美国连50万美元的无人机都防不住，那这个保护伞还有用吗？没有用，沙特为什么还要跟美国绑定呢？为什么不能用人民币结算石油呢？第三，就是美国的国内经济可能暴雷。前面说了，美国资本市场很大一部分资金来自海外，特别是海湾国家。如果这些国家不再有能力投资美国，美股怎么办？美债怎么办？ AI 泡沫怎么办？伊朗人花了20年研究美国的弱点，他们找到了，不是航母，不是战机，不是五角大楼，而是华尔街。说到这里，我们得聊聊特朗普的处境。他发动这场战争最初的想法可能是我要展示美国的力量，但问题来了，这场战争已经打了快半年了，伊朗不仅没投降，而且越打越强。更麻烦的是，特朗普现在停不下来了。如果他现在停战，就等于承认我们打不赢，这对他的政治形象是毁灭性的。如果他继续打，美国的资源是有限的，拦截导弹库存正在消耗，盟友正在动摇，国内通胀正在上升，你打不赢，你又停不了，这就是美国现在最大的困境。好，那我们中国在这一切处于什么位置？首先，中国不是这场战争的参与者，我们保持中立，继续跟各方做生意。伊朗需要我们的商品，海湾国家需要我们的基建和技术，美国需要我们的供应链。中国是唯一一个跟所有相关方都有正常贸易关系的大国。其次，去美元加速化对中国是机遇。如果海湾国家开始接受人民币结算石油，人民币国际化的进程将大大的加速。但同时挑战也在，全球能源价格如果因中东局势暴涨，中国的进口成本也会上升。全球经济如果陷入衰退，中国的出口也会受影响。所以中国的策略是保持定力，不乱站队，该做生意做生意，该发展发展，不乱就输，不输就赢了。最后我想用这句话做一个结尾啊，它就是美国的经济体系本质上是一个金融的庞氏骗局，依靠印美元发国债吸全球的血，维持一个超过自身实力的全球霸权。伊朗人花了20年找到了这个骗局的漏洞，你打不了持久战，你防不住低成本无人机，你拦不住一打就瘫的基础设施。当美元环流被切断，当盟友不再信任，当资本市场开始动摇，这个庞氏骗局还能撑多久？我不知道答案，但我知道一件事情，这场战争可能不是美国赢不赢的问题，而是美国能撑多久的问题。好了，本期视频就到这里，感谢大家收看。